The Florida sun was already doing that thing where it tries to microwave your skin before 8 a.m. Boca Raton is supposed to be paradise, but it's really just a purgatory of zero-lot lines, identical terracotta roofs, and neighbors who treat the Homeowners Association bylaws like sacred religious texts. I was standing in my driveway, nursing a mug of black coffee, just trying to mind my own business. I was wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt that had definitely seen better days. The sprinklers were ticking away in the background. It was peaceful. And then I heard the unmistakable, high-pitched whine of an electric golf cart engine. Enter Brenda. Brenda was the president of the Pelican Bay Estates Homeowners Association. She was a woman who commanded a beige club car like it was a Panzer tank. She wore a pristine white tennis skirt, a visor that looked like it was permanently welded to her skull, and a spray tan that practically radiated a faint, radioactive orange glow. But her most dangerous accessory wasn't her outfit. It was the metal clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. "Morning, Brenda," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I didn't smile. I knew better. Brenda didn't even acknowledge the greeting. She parked her cart diagonally across my driveway, a clear violation of subsection 4, paragraph B of the parking bylaws, but who's counting? And marched straight toward the wrought-iron gate that secured my front courtyard. She didn't look at me. She just reached into her pocket, pulled out a cheap, clear plastic ruler, and squatted down. "Can I help you measure something, Brenda?" I asked, leaning against the stucco wall of my garage. "The gaps," Brenda muttered, her eyes squinting behind oversized designer sunglasses. She jammed the ruler between the iron bars of my gate. "The gaps between the vertical spindles." "They're standard," I said. "It's a gate. It keeps the stray iguanas out." "Standard is not approved," she snapped, standing up abruptly. She unclipped a pink piece of paper from her metal clipboard and thrust it toward my chest. Subsection 12, paragraph C, aesthetic compliance. Courtyard gates must have a gap ratio no larger than 2.5 inches. Yours are 2.75 inches. Furthermore, the finials at the top are classified as spear-tipped, which implies an aggressive posture that does not align with the welcoming, community-focused aesthetic of Pelican Bay Estates. I stared at her. An aggressive posture? "Brenda, it's pieces of metal on hinges. It doesn't have a posture." "It is unapproved," she said, her voice dropping to that cold, authoritative register she usually saved for people who left their garbage cans out 3 minutes past 6 p.m. "This is your first, final, and only warning. You have a $500 fine payable immediately to the management company, and you have exactly 48 hours to remove this unapproved structure." "And if I don't?" I asked, feeling that familiar, warm prickle of annoyance turning into pure, unadulterated spite. "Then we escalate," Brenda smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Fines double every 24 hours. After 30 days, we place a lien on your property. After 60 days, we begin foreclosure proceedings. We will take your house over a 1/4 inch of iron. Do you understand me? Remove it. By Friday." She turned on her heel, marched back to her golf cart, and sped off, the electric motor whining in victory. I looked at the pink slip of paper in my hand. $500, over a 1/4 of an inch. I looked back at the gate. It was a nice gate. But Brenda was right about one thing. It was just a gate. It was ordinary. It was boring. And most importantly, it was completely vulnerable to her petty little HOA rules. 48 hours? I said to the empty driveway. "You want the gate gone?" I walked into my garage, grabbed the keys to my Ford F250, and grabbed a heavy-duty tow strap off the workbench. I didn't even finish my coffee. I backed the truck up right to the edge of the courtyard. I wrapped one end of the yellow nylon strap around the wrought-iron bars of the gate, making sure to loop it right under those aggressive spear-tipped finials. I hooked the other end to the hitch on my bumper. My neighbor, a guy named Dave, who always seemed to be watering his driveway, stopped what he was doing. The hose dangled in his hand, water pooling over his sneakers. Everything okay over there?" he called out. "Just doing some landscaping, Dave," I shouted back. I hopped into the cab, put the truck in four-wheel drive low, and gave it a little gas. The tow strap went taut, the suspension squatted. I heard a loud metallic screech, followed by the deep, satisfying crunch of concrete giving way. The heavy masonry anchors ripped cleanly out of the stucco walls. The entire gate collapsed into the driveway with a deafening crash. I got out, unhooked the strap, and tossed the mangled iron into the bed of the truck. Now there was a massive, 10-foot-wide gaping hole leading into my courtyard. I pulled my phone out and snapped a picture of the empty space. I opened my email, attached the photo, and sent it to the HOA management board, copying Brenda. The subject line was simple: "Unapproved structure removed as requested. Have a blessed day." But I wasn't done. Not even close. You don't just back down when someone threatens to take your house over a fraction of an inch. You dig in. You go to war. But you don't fight them with logic, because logic doesn't work on people who measure metal bars for a living. You fight them with the law. I spent the next 12 hours locked in my home office. The glow of the computer monitor was the only light in the room. Empty energy drink cans began to multiply on my desk. I was reading the Pelican Bay Estate's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It was a massive 200-page document that dictated everything from the exact shade of beige you were allowed to paint your trim to the specific types of perennial flowers permitted in the front beds. Page 42, Section 8. Gates, Fences, and Barriers. All exterior gates, fences, and barriers must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee, ARC, and must conform to the Neighborhood Aesthetic Guidelines. It was an ironclad rule. If I put up another gate, they would just reject it. If I put up a door, they would reject it. Anything that served the function of a gate or barrier fell under their jurisdiction. But what if the barrier wasn't a barrier? What if it was something else entirely? I opened a new tab and started digging through federal property rights, zoning exemptions, and First Amendment protections. Hours ticked by. I was deep down a rabbit hole of obscure Supreme Court rulings and weird property line disputes from the 1970s. And then, at 3:14 a.m., I found it. The holy grail of malicious compliance, the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. VARA. I read the text of the statute, my heart hammering against my ribs. VARA is a federal law that grants certain moral rights to artists. Specifically, it protects works of visual art from intentional distortion, mutilation, or modification. But here was the kicker. If a piece of art is of recognized stature, the law strictly prohibits its destruction. And because it's a federal law, it entirely supersedes local ordinances, state laws, and, most importantly, Homeowners Association bylaws. If I installed a gate, the HOA could force me to tear it down. But if I commissioned a piece of permanent, site-specific public art that just happened to block the entrance to my courtyard, the HOA couldn't legally touch it. If Brenda even tried to scratch the paint, she would be committing a federal offense. I leaned back in my chair and laughed out loud. It was perfect. It was diabolical. I didn't need a gate company. I needed an artist, and I needed a medium that Brenda couldn't possibly move, tow, or destroy. I opened Craigslist. I went to the heavy machinery and industrial surplus section. I typed in bank vault door. There were a surprising number of hits. Banks were downsizing, moving entirely digital, and old physical branches were being demolished across South Florida. Demolition crews often sold the scrap. I found a listing in Miami. Vintage Mosler bank vault door. Decommissioned. 3 tons. Still has functional time lock and heavy steel locking bolts. U-Haul. The price was $3,000. I messaged the seller immediately and told them I'd be there with a flatbed tow truck by noon. Next, I needed an artist. I couldn't just install it myself. VARA requires an actual artist to create and claim the work to establish its protection. I hopped over to a local Boca Raton community forum and searched for metal sculptors. That's how I found Iron Mike. Mike's portfolio consisted entirely of giant, post-apocalyptic-looking kinetic sculptures made from rusty car parts and old farm equipment. He looked like a guy who ate welding, slag, for breakfast. I called the number on his website. "Yeah?" a gravelly voice answered. Grinding sparks hissed in the background. "Mike, my name is Sovereign. I need to commission a site-specific kinetic sculpture for my property in Pelican Bay Estates. I need it done this week, and I need it to incorporate a 3-ton Mosler bank vault door." The grinding stopped. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You live in Pelican Bay?" Mike asked. "I do. Those HOA people called the cops on me last year because my truck was too loud when I was dropping off a copper fountain," Mike said, his voice dripping with venom. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm calling you. I want to build a monument to spite, and I want you to be the visionary behind it." "I'm in," Mike said instantly. "What are we calling this piece?" I looked at the printed copy of the HOA aesthetic guidelines on my desk. "We are going to call it The Imprisonment of Modern Suburbia," I said. "And we're going to make sure it's the most secure piece of contemporary art in the history of Florida." Miami, in the middle of July, is less of a city and more of a heavily populated swamp masquerading as a metropolis. By the time I pulled my F-250 into the dusty, rust-choked lot of Suncoast industrial salvage, I was literally sweating through the upholstery of my seats. The salvage yard looked like the place where the Terminator franchise went to die. Mountains of twisted rebar, decommissioned maritime diesel engines, and what looked like half of a commercial airliner fuselage were baking under the merciless sun. And right in the middle of it all, sitting on a reinforced shipping pallet like a monolithic shrine to capitalism, was the Mosler bank vault door. Honestly, pictures do not do a 3-ton slab of solid steel and titanium justice. It was massive. It was a brushed metal behemoth, 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, framed in a thick steel casing meant to be poured directly into reinforced concrete. The front of it was dominated by a giant, polished stainless steel spinning wheel and 2 gleaming combination dials. Behind a thick pane of tempered glass on the inside panel, I could see the intricate clockwork guts of the mechanical time lock mechanism. A guy wearing a grease-stained tank top and holding a clipboard walked out from behind a stack of rusted I-beams. "You the Boca guy?" he asked, wiping his forehead with a rag. "I am," I said, getting out of the truck and staring up at the vault. "Is the time lock actually functional?" "Yeah, man, I mean, it's mechanical, clockwork. Built in the late 80s before everything went digital," the guy said, tapping the tempered glass with a grimy fingernail. "You wind it up, set the hours, and the internal bolts drop. Once those bolts drop, you could hit this thing with an RPG, and it wouldn't open until the timer runs out. Literally impenetrable. What are you doing with it anyway? Opening a panic room?" "Something like that," I muttered. "How are we getting it on the flatbed?" It took 2 heavy-duty industrial forklifts and 45 minutes of shouting, swearing, and the horrifying sound of groaning metal to get the vault door loaded onto the specialized flatbed tow truck I'd hired. As the driver strapped down the 3 tons of steel with chains thick enough to anchor a battleship, I got back in my truck and headed north toward Delray Beach to meet the mastermind who was going to make this legal nightmare a reality. Iron Mike's studio was located in an industrial park tucked behind a row of transmission repair shops. When I pulled up, the bay door was wide open, and electric blue flashes of a TIG welder were illuminating the dim interior. Heavy metal music was blasting from a pair of blown-out speakers. I walked in, coughing slightly on the smell of ozone, burnt metal, and stale Red Bull. The welding stopped. A guy who looked like a Viking pirate flipped up his welding hood. Mike had a wild, scorched-looking beard, arms covered in chaotic blackwork tattoos, and a manic glint in his eye. He was holding an angle grinder like it was an extension of his own arm. "You're sovereign," Mike said. It wasn't a question. "And you're the artist," I replied, extending a hand. He shook it. His grip felt like a bench vise. "I saw the truck pull in." Mike gestured with his grinder toward the flatbed that had just parked out front. "That is a beautiful piece of machinery out there. Mosler, classic, heavy as hell. I guess you weren't kidding on the phone, so walk me through this. You want to drop a bank vault in front of your house just to piss off the HOA?" "Not just to piss them off, Mike," I corrected him, pulling a thick manila folder out of my bag. "To legally paralyze them. I need you to install it, but more importantly, I need you to claim it." I opened the folder and slapped a stack of papers down on his greasy workbench. "What's all this?" Mike asked, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. "This is a contract of commission," I explained, tapping the top page. "And this is a certificate of authenticity. It officially designates the vault door not as a structural fixture, but as a kinetic, site-specific art installation titled The Imprisonment of Modern Suburbia. You are the artist. I am the patron. By signing this, you are explicitly invoking your moral rights under the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. Mike leaned over the bench, his eyes skimming the legal jargon. "Vara. I've heard of this. A buddy of mine used it to stop a developer from tearing down a mural he painted in Wynwood. So wait, if this is classified as a recognized piece of art? The HOA can't touch it," I finished for him, grinning. "If they try to fine me for an unapproved gate, I refer them to federal law. If they try to bring in a contractor to remove it, they are tampering with a federally protected work of art, which carries statutory damages of up to $150 grand. They're checkmated." Mike started laughing. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the warehouse. "That is the most delightfully toxic thing I have ever heard in my life. I love it. I am literally in. Where do I sign?" He grabbed a Sharpie and scrawled a massive, illegible signature across the documents. "Okay," Mike said, his demeanor instantly shifting from chaotic artist to hyper-focused engineer. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right. I mean, we can't just drop a 3-ton steel frame onto your aesthetic brick pavers. The sheer weight of the door swinging open will rip the frame right out of the ground. We need a foundation." He grabbed a piece of soapstone and started sketching on the steel top of his workbench. "Your courtyard entrance is 10 feet wide, right?" Mike asked. "Yeah, roughly," I said. "Okay, the vault frame is 4 feet wide. That leaves 3 feet on either side. We're going to need to dig a trench, like a serious trench. 3 feet deep, full width. We tie into your existing courtyard walls with 1/2-inch steel rebar, and we pour a footer using 5,000 pounds per square inch high-strength concrete. We embed the vault frame directly into the pour." I stared at the sketch. "Mike, that's going to require a backhoe and a cement mixer. in the middle of Pelican Bay Estates. Brenda is going to have a stroke." "That's the point, isn't it?" Mike grinned fiercely. "But here's the real problem. The time lock. You said you want the time lock functional." "Absolutely," I said. "I want it to lock automatically every single night. The ultimate barrier." Mike scratched his beard, leaving a smudge of grease on his cheek. "The mechanical time locks on those old Moslers usually need to be manually wound from the inside, but we can hook up an electronic linear actuator to the release mechanism. But we can't wire it into your house's main grid. If the HOA gets desperate and manages to cut your power at the street box, you're locked out of your own courtyard." "So how do we power it?" I asked. "Off-grid," Mike said, his eyes lighting up. "I'll weld a mounting bracket to the top of the steel frame. We install a 200-watt monocrystalline solar panel, feed it down into a waterproof enclosure containing a deep-cycle marine battery and a programmable logic controller. Completely self-sufficient. Even if the entire grid goes down in a hurricane, your bank vault is still keeping the HOA out." Honestly, I was in awe. "You are an evil genius, Mike." "I prefer the term kinetic sculptor," he winked. "All right, I'm going to need a crew of 3 guys, a mini excavator, a concrete truck, and a 30-ton knuckle-boom crane to lift that vault off the flatbed and drop it into the trench. This is going to cost you, Sovereign." "Money is no object when it comes to sheer spite," I said. "When can we do it?" "We prep the site tomorrow night under the cover of darkness," Mike said, chugging the last of his Red Bull and crushing the can in his fist. "And we drop the vault in at high noon on Thursday. Maximum visibility, maximum chaos." The next 36 hours were a blur of chaotic logistics. Wednesday night, at exactly 11 p.m., Mike and 2 of his heavily tattooed apprentices rolled into Pelican Bay Estates in an unmarked box truck. We worked like a covert Black Ops team. Because we couldn't run a loud, gas-powered excavator at midnight without waking up the entire subdivision and triggering an immediate police response, we had to dig the foundation trench by hand. Florida soil is mostly sand and crushed coral, but digging a trench 3 feet deep and 10 feet wide with nothing but pickaxes and shovels in the sweltering, humid night was absolute torture. "I literally cannot believe I am risking a noise violation citation for this," Mike hissed, leaning on his shovel at around 2 a.m., sweat pouring down his face. "If a neighborhood watch patrol rolls by, we just tell them we're planting a very deep, very aggressive row of ficus bushes." "Just keep digging," I whispered, tossing a shovelful of dirt into the back of my truck. "Brenda does her morning perimeter patrol at 7:30 a.m. sharp. We need the trench finished and the rebar cage tied before the sun comes up." By 5 a.m., my arms felt like lead, my back was screaming, and I had blisters on top of my blisters. But we did it. A perfectly excavated, structurally sound trench spanned the entrance to my courtyard. Mike and his guys expertly tied a massive cage of steel rebar, anchoring it deep into the stucco walls on either side. We threw a large blue tarp over the trench, packed up the tools, and Mike's truck vanished into the dawn just as the first sprinklers in the neighborhood started to hiss to life. I took a shower, drank 3 cups of coffee, and sat in an Adirondack chair on my front porch, waiting. At exactly 7:32 a.m., the familiar whine of the electric golf cart drifted down the street. Brenda. She rolled up to my driveway, holding her clipboard like a shield. She slammed the brakes, her eyes widening behind her sunglasses as she took in the scene. The wrought-iron gate was gone. In its place was a blue tarp covering a massive hole in the ground. She marched over to the edge of the driveway, her lips pursed so tightly they practically disappeared. "Good morning, Brenda," I called out cheerfully, raising my coffee mug. "Gate's gone, just like you asked, fully compliant." She stared at the tarp, her eyes narrowing. "What is under there, Sovereign? Are you digging a moat? Because moats are strictly prohibited under Section 4, Paragraph D regarding standing water features. No moat, Brenda, I smiled, stepping off the porch. Just prepping the site. Pelican Bay Estates demands a certain level of aesthetic grandeur, right? I realized my old gate was just too common, too aggressive. So I've commissioned a piece of custom, site-specific art to serve as the new entrance to my courtyard. It's going to really elevate the community. Brenda scoffed, a short, sharp sound of absolute derision. Art? Don't play games with me. Whatever structure you are putting there must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee. I need blueprints, I need material samples, and I need a 30-day review period. If you install an unapproved barrier, I will have the contractors halted immediately. It's not a barrier, Brenda, I said, my voice dripping with fake innocence. It's a kinetic sculpture. And I'm afraid the artist is very eccentric. He doesn't work with blueprints. He works with feelings and raw industrial steel. You have until 5 p.m. today to fill that hole back in, Brenda threatened, jabbing a manicured finger toward me. If you try to install a gate without my explicit written approval, I will have the Boca police here to issue a stop-work order faster than you can blink. I look forward to it, I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. She sped off, the golf cart practically fishtailing in her fury. I guess she thought she had me cornered. I guess she thought her little architectural review committee was the highest authority in the land. She had no idea what was rolling down Interstate 95 toward her precious subdivision. At 11:45 a.m., the ground actually started to vibrate. I was standing in my driveway when the convoy arrived. Leading the pack was Mike in his rusted-out dually pickup, blaring AC/DC out of his open windows. Behind him was a massive rotating cement mixer truck, and bringing up the rear, its diesel, engine roaring like a dragon, was a 30-ton Kenworth knuckle boom crane carrying the 3-ton Mosler bank vault strapped to its flatbed. The sheer noise of the convoy arriving shattered the pristine silence of Pelican Bay Estates. Doors opened. Neighbors stepped out onto their manicured lawns, clutching their pearls and their cell phones. Mike jumped out of his truck, wearing a neon orange high-visibility vest over a black t-shirt. "All right, let's make some art," he roared, waving the crane operator into my driveway. The Kenworth backed in, its massive hydraulic outriggers extending like spider legs and planting themselves firmly onto my driveway pavers with a loud crunch. "Hey, watch the pavers!" I yelled over the diesel engine. "Sacrifices must be made for the creative process," Mike yelled back, already directing the cement mixer to back up to the edge of the trench. This was the point of no return. We ripped the blue tarp away. The cement mixer spun, its chute extending over the trench. With a wet, heavy, slurping sound, 5 yards of 5,000 pounds per square inch concrete began pouring into the foundation hole, burying the rebar cage in a thick, gray slurry. Mike's apprentices were in the trench in rubber boots, vibrating the concrete to remove air bubbles, working with frantic, practiced efficiency. And then, the crane operator went to work. The hydraulic arm of the crane extended high into the air, blocking out the sun. Thick nylon rigging straps were hooked to the massive steel frame of the Mosler vault. "Take up the slack!" Mike shouted, making upward motions with his hands. The engine roared, the cables tightened, and slowly, agonizingly, 3 tons of brushed steel and titanium lifted off the flatbed. It swung through the air, a monolithic slab of impenetrable security dangling above the pristine suburban driveway. I looked down the street. Brenda's golf cart was barreling toward us at top speed. She was leaning forward, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. She had her phone pressed to her ear. "Lower it!" Mike screamed. The crane operator expertly guided the massive vault door down. It hovered directly over the wet concrete foundation. "Hold!" Mike yelled, grabbing a 4-foot level and slapping it against the steel frame. "Okay, drop it!" With a heavy, wet thud that I felt in my teeth, the steel frame of the bank vault settled into the wet concrete. It was perfectly flush, perfectly level, a literal fortress door standing right in the middle of an HOA-controlled neighborhood. Brenda slammed her golf cart to a halt right at the edge of my property line. She practically leaped out, her face a mask of absolute, unhinged rage. "Stop!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Stop work immediately! What is this? What is this abomination?" Mike stepped out from behind the vault, holding his level like a staff. He wiped a smudge of wet concrete off his cheek and looked Brenda up and down. "It's called the imprisonment of modern suburbia, lady," Mike said, deadpan. "I'm the artist. Please step back. You're interrupting my creative flow." Brenda literally looked like she was going to spontaneously combust right there on the freshly poured concrete. Her jaw was unhinged, her designer sunglasses were slightly askew, and she was pointing a trembling manicured finger at the 3 tons of brushed steel now permanently fused into my property line. "Creative flow?" she practically squeaked, her voice hitting an octave that I'm pretty sure only the neighborhood golden retrievers could fully appreciate. "That is a bank vault. You are building a commercial bank vault in a residential zone. This is a massive code violation. This is an unpermitted bunker." "Honestly, Brenda, bunker is such an ugly word," I said, stepping up next to Mike and admiring the gleaming stainless steel combination dials. "It's a commentary on the hyper-militarization of suburban boundaries. See how the heavy metal juxtaposes with the fragile terracotta roofs? It really makes you think, I guess." "I am calling the police," Brenda gasped, whipping her phone out and jabbing the screen with her thumb. "You are going to jail. Both of you. And this monstrosity is being impounded." Mike didn't even blink. He just turned to his apprentices. "All right, guys, let's get the solar panel mounted and the linear actuator wired into the time lock before the concrete sets completely. We want this baby fully operational by sunset." As the crane operator packed up his rig and rumbled out of the neighborhood, Brenda stood on the sidewalk, pacing back and forth, frantically whispering into her phone. Neighbors had officially abandoned any pretense of subtlety. Dave, the driveway watering guy from next door, was literally standing on a lawn chair to get a better view over the hedges. I just waved at him. He slowly lowered his hose. It took exactly 14 minutes for the Boca Raton Police Department to arrive. Not one, but 2 cruisers came tearing down the street, their lights flashing, sirens giving a brief, authoritative whoop as they angled to block my driveway. 2 patrol officers stepped out. They had their hands resting casually near their belts, expecting to find an illegal doomsday prepper compound or a sovereign citizen standoff. Instead, they found me drinking lukewarm coffee, Mike welding a mounting bracket to the top of a steel frame, and a massive, gleaming bank vault door standing perfectly upright in a trench of wet concrete. The younger officer, a guy whose name tag read Miller, stopped dead in his tracks. He pushed his aviators up into his hair and just stared. "Okay," Officer Miller sighed, looking from the vault to me, and then to Brenda, who was practically vibrating with righteous fury. "Ma'am, you reported a heavily fortified barricade and illegal bunker construction?" "Yes," Brenda shrieked, marching over and pointing at the door. "Look at it! He's turning Pelican Bay Estates into Fort Knox. It's an unapproved structure. It violates aesthetic guidelines, it's a zoning violation, and I demand you arrest them and order a teardown immediately." The older officer, a tired-looking veteran named Sergeant Davis, hooked his thumbs into his duty belt and walked slowly up to the vault. He reached out and tapped the thick, tempered glass covering the clockwork time lock mechanism. Is this an actual Mosler vault door?" Sergeant Davis asked, sounding low-key impressed. "Good eye, officer," I said, stepping forward with my most cooperative, friendly smile. "It sure is. Decommissioned, of course, but fully restored." "Sir, you can't just drop a bank vault in your driveway," Miller said, shaking his head. "I mean, I'm pretty sure that's a zoning issue, or a building permit issue, or something." "Oh, it would be," I agreed smoothly. "If it were a door, or a gate, or a barrier, but it's not." Brenda let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "It is literally a door! It has hinges! It has a lock!" "It's registered contemporary art," I corrected her, pulling the manila folder from the porch chair and handing it to Sergeant Davis. "Officer, what you are looking at is a site-specific, kinetic sculpture titled The Imprisonment of Modern Suburbia. This gentleman here is the artist, Mike. I have simply commissioned him to install his vision on my private property." Davis opened the folder. He looked at the certificate of authenticity. He looked at the contract of commission. Then he looked up at Mike, who was currently wiping grease off his forehead and nodding solemnly. "You're an artist?" Davis asked. "I prefer kinetic sculptor, but yes," Mike said in his gravelly pirate voice. "It's a commentary on late-stage capitalism." "Right," Davis muttered, clearly fighting a losing battle against a smirk. He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, this is private property, and according to these documents, this is a commissioned piece of art. That makes this a civil matter, not a criminal one. We can't issue a stop work order on a private art installation." "It is blocking his courtyard!" Brenda yelled, her face now matching the color of a boiled lobster. "It is serving the function of an unapproved gate." "I mean, function is subjective, Brenda," I chimed in. "The fact that it happens to perfectly enclose my courtyard is purely a coincidence of the artist's spatial expression. Speaking of which, Mike, do you want to show the officers the kinetic aspect of the piece?" "Oh, absolutely," Mike grinned. Mike walked up to the massive stainless steel wheel on the front of the door. He grabbed the handle and gave it a hard spin. The wheel rotated smoothly, silently on its heavy bearings. With a deep, mechanical clatter that sounded like a shotgun racking, the massive solid steel locking bolts shot out of the side of the door. "And the best part," Mike said, pointing to the digital timer box he had wired to the solar panel above, "is the automated performance aspect. Every night at exactly 10 p.m., the electronic linear actuator engages the mechanical time lock. For 8 hours, those bolts drop. And once they drop, nobody gets in," I finished. "Not me, not the mailman, and definitely not the HOA. Total impenetrable lockdown. It's like a metaphor for emotional boundaries, honestly." Officer Miller actually had to turn around and cough to hide his laughter. Sergeant Davis just handed the folder back to me, shaking his head slowly. "Well, Mr. Sovereign," Davis said, his tone dry as dust, "it's certainly a striking piece. Ma'am, if you have an issue with the aesthetics, you're going to have to take it up with the HOA board and file a civil suit. There's nothing the police can do here." "This isn't over," Brenda hissed, backing away as the officers returned to their cruisers. "I am calling an emergency board meeting. I will fine you $10,000. I will put a lien on this house so fast your head will spin." "Make sure you spell suburbia right on the citation, Brenda," I called out as she stomped back to her golf cart. The heavy clang of the vault door shutting for the first time echoed through the neighborhood like a judge's gavel. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. 2 days later, I was formally summoned to the Pelican Bay Estates clubhouse for an emergency, closed-door disciplinary hearing. I didn't show up in my gym shorts this time. I wore a tailored navy blue suit. I carried a thick, leather-bound binder. I felt like a shark swimming into a pool of very confused, very angry guppies. The clubhouse boardroom smelled like stale potpourri and misplaced authority. Brenda sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by 4 other board members, who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. On a large TV screen mounted to the wall, the HOA's retained attorney, a slick-looking guy named Peterson, was dialed in via Zoom from his office in Miami. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table. I didn't say a word. I just placed my binder down and waited. "Let the record show that the homeowner has arrived," Brenda said tightly, slamming a little wooden gavel onto the table. "We are here to address the egregious, unpermitted, and frankly offensive structure erected on Lot 42. Sovereign, you have blatantly violated Section 8 regarding exterior barriers. The Architectural Review Committee has retroactively denied your structure. You are hereby issued a fine of $10,000, and you have exactly 5 business days to remove that vault, or we will hire a demolition crew to remove it for you at your expense." She sat back, crossing her arms, a smug, triumphant smile plastered across her face. She thought she had won. She thought the paper shield of her little rule book was impenetrable. I slowly opened my binder. "Brenda, members of the board, Mr. Peterson on the screen," I started, keeping my voice incredibly calm and measured. "I acknowledge receipt of your aesthetic complaints. However, you cannot fine me, and you absolutely cannot touch that door." "Watch us," Brenda snapped. "Mr. Peterson," I said, ignoring her and looking directly at the Zoom screen. "As legal counsel for this association, I assume you are familiar with the United States Code, specifically Title 17, Chapter 1? The lawyer on the screen frowned, leaning closer to his webcam. "Copyright law? What does that have to do with a zoning violation?" "Section 106A, I clarified, pulling a crisp, highlighted document from my binder and sliding it down the table. "The Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990, also known as VARA. It is a federal statute that grants artists moral rights to their work, protecting it from destruction, distortion, or mutilation." The boardroom was dead silent. Brenda looked at the paper, then up at the screen. "Peterson, what is he talking about?" "The structure in my driveway is not a gate," I said, my voice rising just enough to command the room. "It is a legally commissioned, site-specific kinetic sculpture. The artist, Mike, retains his VARA rights. Federal law explicitly states that a piece of recognized public art incorporated into a building cannot be destroyed or removed without the explicit written consent of the artist." I paused, letting that sink in. Then I dropped the hammer. "If this HOA board hires a demolition crew," I continued, staring dead into Brenda's eyes, "and they so much as scratch the brushed steel on that vault door, you will be committing a federal offense. The artist will immediately sue this Homeowners Association in federal court for statutory damages of up to $150,000 per violation. Furthermore, under the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution, federal law wholly supersedes your neighborhood aesthetic guidelines." On the TV screen, the loud, frantic clacking of a keyboard filled the silence. Peterson was desperately Googling the statute. "This is ridiculous," Brenda scoffed, though her voice wavered. "It's a door! You can't just call a door art and magically ignore the rules. Peterson, tell him he's crazy." The clacking on the screen stopped. Peterson took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked physically ill. "Brenda," the lawyer sighed heavily through the clubhouse speakers. He actually has a case. If he has a valid contract of commission, and the artist asserts VARA rights, attempting to forcefully remove it could expose the entire association to massive federal liability. Do not touch that door." Brenda's face drained of color. "What? No, that's impossible. We have rules. We have a cohesive neighborhood aesthetic." "You have a binder full of beige paint swatches, Brenda," I said softly, closing my leather binder. "I have the federal government. The vault stays. The fine is void. And if I see you anywhere near my property with that plastic ruler again, I will have Mike weld a second vault door right behind the first one." I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out of the clubhouse. I didn't look back. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. 2 days after the board meeting, Brenda abruptly resigned as HOA president, citing irreconcilable artistic differences with the neighborhood. Word on the street was she moved down to Delray Beach to terrorize a condo board that strictly enforced pet weight limits. Honestly, good riddance. As for me, I settled into my new daily routine. Every evening, when I pulled my truck into the driveway, I didn't just click a little plastic button on a visor remote. No, I stepped out of my truck, walked up to my 3-ton piece of kinetic art, grabbed the massive stainless steel wheel, and gave it a hard, satisfying spin. The heavy metal clack, clack, clack of the internal locking bolts retracting was like music. I would pull open the foot-thick titanium door, pull my truck in, and push the vault shut behind me. And at exactly 10 p.m., the electronic hum of the linear actuator would engage, dropping the pins, plunging my courtyard into impenetrable, federally protected lockdown until 6 a.m. The HOA eventually sent a very polite, very carefully worded letter asking if I might consider painting the vault door a neutral sand color. I forwarded the request to Mike. He replied by mailing them a rusty wrench and a Polaroid of him flipping off the camera. They never asked again. And that is how you beat them. You don't argue over inches. You don't beg for approval from people who peek at neighborhood committee meetings. You find the biggest, heaviest loophole the law has to offer, and you drop it right on their front lawn. Remember, guys, when they close a door, just build a bigger, federally protected one with a mechanical time lock. Stay sovereign